Great, wonderful. It's great to see so many friends of Extend here. Merphie, Benzi, thanks for making the time. We want to, we're excited to hear about this update. So much has happened in Israeli politics in the past several weeks. So much has happened in the past year. So I know a lot of people are keen to hear about the situation with Corona. They're keen to hear how that's affected the political situation and where we are moving forward. And as always, Breaking the Silence is very much at the forefront of the movement for strengthening Israeli democracy and for ending the occupation. So thanks so much for making the time. Let's start, since we have a manageable group here, why doesn't everyone go around and just say a quick word about your connection either to activism in Israel or to Extend, how you ended up with us in the call today, and maybe that'll be a good starting point for where we can take the conversation. And then we'll hear from both Merphie and from Benzi, who are Breaking the Silence's leaders on diaspora Jewish engagement. And then Merphie will give us an overview of what's happening on the ground. So I think what we found in these Zoom calls is the best thing to do is go from left to right on one person's screen. So I'll just say a name, and then if that person can give just a brief description, again, if your connection to Extend, if you're a participant or have been involved in some other way, and then, or your connection to activism in Israel. So let's start up here with Lisa.
Hi everyone, Lisa Giddens-White calling in from Chicago. I took an Extend trip January of 2019, and I actually met Merphie. Merphie, you did our tour of Hebron when we were there early last year. So nice to see you all. Nice to see some friendly faces.
Nice to see you, Lisa.
Nice to see you again.
Julie, you're next.
I was introduced to Sam through his civil rights lawyer father, who said, you might be interested in what my son is doing. And I'm fascinated by what his son is doing and have long felt strongly, as he had as a Jew, outraged. So that's how I'm here.
Nice to see you, Julie. Julia.
Hi everyone, calling from Northwest Spain. I first went on Extend in 2013 and have worked with Sam on Extend since 2016. So I've been on 3 or 4 Breaking the Silence tours in Hebron, 2 with Merphie. Amazing to be here. Thanks everyone for coming.
Nice to see you, Julia. Deborah. Deborah, you're on mute.
Unmute myself. Okay, hi. Hi, everyone. I met Merphie on a Breaking the Silence tour in Israel, and then I invited her to my home in Westchester, Lower Westchester, and Sam was terrific and helped me organize it. Yeah.
Nice to see you, Deborah. Barbara, you next.
Unmute. Okay. Hi, I'm Barbara Lando, and I'm here from Toronto, Canada. And I was on a New Israel Fund tour at the end of May, beginning of June, and went to Hebron. Been there several times. I'm very involved with not only the New Israel Fund, but I'm on the board of J-Space Canada, and I chair their Shared Society Committee, and am part of a new communication link, J-Link, and I see Giorgio is also here. He'll maybe mention that. A new worldwide link for progressive Jewish organizations. And I'm very involved with Heart to Heart, which is a summer camp for Jewish and Palestinian kids that come to Ontario, and it's part of Givat Haviva, and that's enough for me. Okay, take care.
Great. Thanks so much, Barbara. Peter.
Hi, Peter Fry. My wife Carrie and I have been supporters of Extend, I think almost since the beginning. I'm on the National Board of J Street, and I'm on the International Council of the New Israel Fund. And I've been on, I think, 3 Breaking the Silence tours to Hebron, which somehow you have to be a masochist to do it 3 times. That would have been that we were going to go there in the next J Street trip in May, but it got canceled. So it probably would have been my 4th. So happy to be on this call.
Nice to see you, Peter. And Jane and Max.
Hi, we're calling from Greensboro, North Carolina. Jane and I take groups of Quakers over to Israel and Palestine every summer, and have been fortunate to have Merphie lead us through Hebron several times, and other folk. And we met the Extend group the first summer that they were touring Hebron, and were able to invite them into Ramallah and introduce them to some of our friends there.
Very nice to see you guys.
Good to see
Thanks.
you.
Malcolm, you're next.
Hello, everybody. My name is Malkoun. I met Bensi in a certain tour. I'm a Palestinian from Jerusalem, and he invited me to Extend to check it out. So that's how I got to know Extend. And I've been in the, you could say, because I'm a geopolitical tour guide, I've been in the activism scene as well. Thank you.
Nice to see you, Malcolm. Bill.
Hi, my contact with Extend was through All That's Left, and I haven't had the privilege of doing anything more than talk to you since then. I'm calling from Beit Kerem, Jerusalem.
Rachel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel. I'm a senior at Colorado College, so finishing off my college experience online is a bit weird right now, but I'm very excited to be in this call. I'm originally from the North Shore of Chicago, but currently in Colorado Springs. I went on an Extend trip 2 summers ago, and I also stayed in Israel, worked with All That's Left, and interned for Windows, an anti-occupation NGO. I'm also on the national board of J Street U. So it's a little bit about me.
Great. Nice to see you, Rachel. Lawrence.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Larry Wolf. I live in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. Calling.
So do I. Me too.
We should meet sometime, virtually or otherwise. I serve as the chapter coordinator of Jewish Voice for Peace in Westchester. Sam, I heard you at your last visit to Westpac, which is about, what, 6 weeks ago or so?
Something like that. Time's hard to tell these days.
It really is. It's a timeless state we're in practically. So I'm here to learn.
Nice to see you. Jordan.
Nice to see you.
Hey, I'm Jordan. I am not actually in this tropical paradise right now, but I'm mentally trying to be, so that's kind of why I have this background. I went on Extend this past summer with Sam. I'm currently a PhD student in demography and population health, so I'm, kind of this stuff 24/7 right now. So, really interested in, learning more about how, our current public health crisis and the ongoing occupation and humanitarian crisis there intersect. So, yeah, glad to be here.
Nice to see you, Jordan. Madeline. You're still on mute. There we go.
Israel last year, exactly. I went on a Breaking the Silence trip with Dean, I believe his name is. And it was like really a fellow a month ago, and we also went on a Hebron trip, so it was really interesting to compare the leftist perspective and then the rightist perspective of that particular area. So I'm just here to gain more knowledge and different perspectives of that area. So yeah.
Calypso.
Sorry.
I was nice to see you, Madeline. I was just saying Calypso's next.
Yeah, sorry, just Unmuting. So I'm Calypso Nicolaides, and I teach at Oxford International Relations and Conflict Resolution. And Sam kindly introduced me to Breaking the Silence a couple of years ago. We were involved there. And one of the things I try to do is to connect kind of mainstream IR academics to the more kind of radical mindset and approaches that Extend is promoting.
Nice to see you, Calypso. Masha, looks like we've got several people there. You guys are on. Okay.
Yes. There are three of us here. I'm Masha Gessen. I'm a journalist in New York. This is my daughter, Yolka.
Hi, I'm Yolka. I volunteered in Palestine near Ramallah last summer. I was going to go again now, but that's not happening. So yeah, I don't know, because I'm curious.
Great.
Hi, I'm Julia. I've gone on a Breaking the Silence tour to Hebron, and I'm interested.
Great. All right. Thanks for joining. Francis. Francis, can you hear me?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. I think my camera is broken. Hi, I'm Francis. I'm in Las Vegas. It's early. And I went on a Breaking the Silence tour in 2017 when I was traveling through Israel and Palestine and some other countries. And I had to get up really early for a meeting, and I saw that this was happening on Facebook right after. So I'm just kind of joining in to listen in. Yeah.
Thanks for joining. And lastly, we've got Alan.
Hello, wait a second. Can you see me now? Okay, yes. I got my video on. I don't have any, I'm calling from Tel Aviv. My name is Alan Horowitz. I don't have any connection to Extend, except I got an email from my brother suggesting that maybe I want to listen. So that's why I'm here on the call. You might, you mentioned Westpac. You might know my brother. His name is Howard Horowitz.
You sound a lot like him.
Yes. So that's why I'm here, and I'm here to listen, and I'm living this every day. I just thought of just one comment before we get started. I don't want to take a lot of time, but
well, Alan, let's save the conversation for later.
Okay,
we just want to get introductions, and we want to hand it over to our folks from Breaking the Silence. So we'll have time for questions later. Great. Okay, it's good to have a sense of who everyone is in the room, the virtual room. And it's great that we've got really deep knowledge levels and folks who have a lot of experience on the ground. So that's helpful to set the terms of the conversation.
I didn't see Giorgio Gomel be introduced. He's.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Okay, yeah. Giorgio, I apologize. Oh, you're on mute there. I'm going to unmute you.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm calling from Rome, Italy. I'm the president of Alliance for Middle East Peace in Europe.
Okay.
And I know Breaking the Silence. I've been to Palestine several times over the years. Okay.
Good. Very nice to meet. Thanks for joining the call. I'd love to hear more about Almup's work in Europe. I'm very familiar with it in the States, so maybe we can chat afterwards. Okay, good. So thank you to Breaking the Silence's Jewish Diaspora Engagement team, Benzi and Merphie, for meeting us. I think we said we'd start with Benzi. So Benzi, you want to take it away?
Sure. Nice to meet you all. I know Sam for a long time. We think we met at a cousin's wedding first. And I made Aliyah to Israel, moved to Israel in 2011, served in Sayeret Nahal, which is a Special Forces infantry unit from 2012 to 2015. I served for extended periods of time in the West Bank. I was also deployed to the Gaza Strip in 2014. And during my experience there, I really had, a formative experience. And after being discharged, I began to get involved and active in left-wing politics in Israel. First, I was involved with the Meretz Party, founding a student group at Bar Ilan University. And then I began helping facilitate extend programs. And through that, my connection was strengthened also with Breaking the Silence. I had given testimony to Breaking the Silence in 2018. And I met Becca, who's our educational director, on an extend program this past June. And from that meeting, I ultimately joined a speaking tour in the US in November. We were in a number of cities. And since then, I've been working at Breaking the Silence. I'm pretty new, so I'm learning a lot of kind of how to do this kind of coordination and engagement. But I've, so I'm here also kind of shadowing Merphie, but also I'm happy to answer questions and perhaps share a few of the testimonies from my experience in the territories at the end.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for joining us, Benzi. And for those of you who are sort of beginning to engage with Breaking the Silence, you'll see a lot more of Benzi, who is now leading taking over, transitioning to the diaspora outreach. So with that, let's go to Merphie, who many of us know, and I think we're all curious to hear about how the Corona situation has affected so many of the political issues that we care about in Israel. So let me hand it over to Merphie Bubis, who we're really lucky to have today to give us this update from the ground.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well? Hello? Okay.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay. I was just waiting for an approval. Great. So I was wondering, I'll try to do this share screen thing, if that's okay. Just so I can put up some photos and some slides, if that's all right. I'll give it a try and see how it goes. Can you see what's on my screen?
Yes.
Great. You see just a headline with Israel-Palestine?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. Great. Okay. So we can go back to that shortly. So I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm really thankful for all of you for being on this call. I'm calling in from Jaffa, Tel Aviv. I've been a member of Breaking the Silence for the past 4 years, a little over 4 years, basically since I finished my military service in the West Bank. I served between 2013 and 2015 in a unit called the Civil Administration, which so I know I've met a lot of you over the years, but for those of you who don't know, the Civil Administration is basically the backbone of the occupation's bureaucracy. It's essentially the government of the West Bank and in some forms of Gaza as well, but it's a military unit to all intents and purposes. So soldiers, officers are basically managing civilian life in these areas. Of course, depending on the level of involvement of either the PA or the Hamas in Gaza, obviously there's more complexities to that. I was stationed outside of Nablus in the north of the West Bank for 2 years, and my role within the civil administration was in the operations room of our unit, so dealing with a lot of what we call humanitarian or civilian matters that have to do with our region. It can be car accidents, fires that break out, coordinating electricians, high school exams, all sorts of things that have to do with Palestinian civilian life. I mean, there's a lot to say about that dynamic, but I think I can only guess that the people who are in this time, in positions within the civil administration are going through a very interesting and probably difficult time as well. We'll talk about what's going on in the West Bank shortly. I'll say, one formative thing for me, and maybe some of you folks have heard this before when we've met. I think one of the most crucial things for me as an individual and for Breaking the Silence, a group of former soldiers that have served in the occupied territories, was to understand is that the civil administration is not this kind of humanitarian, beacon of kind of justice and humanitarian response. But actually, on the contrary, that the mere bureaucracy is actually one of the ways that we can understand how deep the occupation runs, how deep the control of everyday Palestinian life is. And there's a big question now with the situation, how much of medical care and how much of medical supplies in general and, responsibility overall the Israeli occupation will exert. So there's really, startling and important questions being raised now from within kind of our camp, the human rights camp in Israel. Maybe I'll just start by a quick overview. I'm sure some of you have been following, the news and seeing the numbers, but just so we can get our heads wrapped around, what's going on right now. I'll do this share screen thing. This is very cool. Also getting used to different aspects of this kind of life. So the three things that Sam asked me to talk about, and I think this could give us a bit of a framing for the conversation, is what's going on in Israel, what's going on in the West Bank and Gaza, and how this virus has been really a turning point, I would say, or another turning point when it comes to Israeli democracy and what's left of it within the 48 borders. We've seen this all around the world, how basically powerful and anti-democratic leaders are using this moment to actually exert more force and more power and less privacy on citizens and, more very drastic measures that will maybe last much after the virus is gone. So those are kind of a few things that I can run through. The virus actually reached Bethlehem before it did Israel, at least officially. Pretty soon there were, of course, cases in Israel as well. We're talking about in Israel today, just a little over 6,000 people who are sick with the virus, but that also includes people who have recovered. So just a little bit under that number. And 33 people who unfortunately have died. Mostly, as I'm sure you've seen in your various countries, people who are already have background sicknesses and the elderly. And the recovery rate for young and healthy people is, thank God, very high. And the West Bank and Gaza, we're looking at much lower numbers of people who are sick, but of course the proportion of, or the comparison, in terms of the medical infrastructure and the infrastructure overall to deal with such a crisis is just uncomparable. So the West Bank had already been for a few weeks basically in a similar situation, slowly enforcing more regulations. Here in Israel now, we're at a point where there's sort of a closure, a curfew. We're kind of figuring out the terms. We usually know these terms very well when they come to the West Bank and the Palestinian territories, and now we're kind of using these terms here at home, obviously in a different context. But indeed, it's a new reality for most Israelis. So the restrictions are basically that if there's you can only leave your house for anything urgent or necessary, like going to the supermarket or getting medical care, and other than that, one is pretty much confined to 100 meters outside of their home. In Bethlehem, when these few cases erupted in Bethlehem, the city already a little over 2 weeks ago entered a lockdown, basically. Hundreds, if maybe thousands of tourists ended up staying there longer than they intended. That's the situation in terms of the virus. And in Gaza, as some of you have probably heard, there are a few cases just of the past week, 2 people who came back from Pakistan or Afghanistan and as we know, infected the people around them, which is basically inevitable. For years now, you know, when we've been hearing about Gaza, we've been told that there's a humanitarian crisis, and it keeps getting worse and worse, and we are told by the experts that it's going to become unbearable, that it's going to become unlivable. But I think, you know, if we're truthful, if we're honest with ourselves, it's it has already been a very unlivable place for many, many years. You know, not a life that we wish for anyone, you know, of us and our loved ones. In the various military operations and wars in Gaza over the past decade, much of the very crucial infrastructure was bombed. A major power plant in 2008, hospitals in 2014. And overall, because of the situation in Gaza, because of the blockade of the past 12, 13 years, there's also a very dire situation with medical staff that don't get the right training. So they're many times will be restricted from leaving the Gaza Strip to get you know, medical trainings to be updated with new technology and new treatment. And basically everything that goes in and out into the Gaza Strip is under very, very strict regulations of the Israeli government, which I'm sure some of you may know. What Israel calls the dual use list, a very meticulous and specific list of not only of goods, but of materials, very basic materials. The reasoning being that this concept of dual use, so materials that can also be used for terrorism and not for civilian purposes, which leads to a very, very difficult situation. And honestly, I myself and, you know, people around us in the human rights and kind of civil society world don't really know what's going to happen. We don't have answers, you know, just like anyone else doesn't. What we can hope for, at least in the next few days and weeks, is that a heavy curfew of people in their homes will help lower the spread. But what I think is really important in this moment, both for the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and that's something that we're seeing from various human rights organizations in Israel, is demanding that the Israeli government take responsibility, a very basic humanitarian responsibility. And what we're seeing is, you know, this has to do with, I think, bigger changes in our political world with Trump's plan and Netanyahu's very explicit path towards annexation of parts of the West Bank, is that for many years now, the right wing has been trying to, as we say, eat the cake or the pie and have it full, meaning we want to control these areas. We want complete control over all walks of life of a Palestinian society, but we're not willing to take the responsibility when it comes to democratic and civil rights, and in some cases humanitarian cases as well. So I mean, this is not new for the Gaza Strip. There have been cancer patients that haven't gotten treatment and unfortunately died in the Gaza Strip because they didn't get treatment on time, and young children who are going into hospitals in Israel, but their parents or a loved one or close one doesn't have a permit to escort them, so they basically travel alone inside Israel and depend on volunteers. But this is much worse than most places in the world have encountered. This is honestly a very new situation to us. I think it's kind of tricky for us as a group, as a movement. It's part of a camp that has been for many years demanding ending the occupation. And some parts of our camp, you know, more of the kind of two-state camp, you know, has been talking about separating from Palestinians, about not actually annexing, not actually taking responsibility in that sense. And here we're in a very tricky moment where we're actually demanding the Israeli government to be more active in this humanitarian crisis. And I think it's never been more clear that if Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank are not healthy and safe, then we will not be either. And so, at least from a kind of from a selfish and kind of self-centered perspective, we can hope that maybe the Israeli government will act and not only leave it up to the international community, which is what usually happens. That's in terms of kind of the region, and I guess I'll leave questions at the end just to keep things orderly. But the other major thing that has been happening is that Israel has been in 3 waves of elections this year. Just with regard to the West Bank, this is a photo actually from a little over 2 weeks ago already at Walaja checkpoint just outside of Jerusalem. So you can see the soldiers are already prepared with protective gear. This didn't stop the kind of routine military operations that we see normally in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem very heavily, still continues. So you'll see border police and soldiers with kind of Corona gear, but still, middle of the night arrests, patrols, and that sort of thing. And the other thing that I wanted to focus on just a little bit is basically the failure the failure to form a government, especially in such a crucial time. So the elections, the 3rd wave of elections in Israel were just around the beginning of March, and that's when the corona kind of started to erupt here in Israel. And there was a very small but hopeful chance that Gantz, the center party, blue and white, would form a minority government supported from within or from without by the joint list that had historic amount of seats in this elections, 15 seats. And many new Jewish Israeli voters that haven't, that traditionally voted for Labor or Meretz and gradually kind of shifted to the left. So it was very close to happening, or at least a lot of people believed so. And basically, if I keep it short, basically last minute, Gantz decided to to basically enter Netanyahu's government in some sort of weird agreement that no one really expected, first becoming chair of Knesset and then expecting to rotate in a unity government with the Likud. I'm not a blue and white voter, and I was never a fan of Benny Gantz, but it was definitely more than a letdown for really anyone from blue and white and to the left of them. I mean, some would say it wasn't surprising, but I think the issue is not so much Gantz and the center and how they play their politics, because at the end of the day, what's important for us as those who are fighting the occupation and fighting anti-democratic trends is to see the root of the cause, the root of the problem. I also, there's I think a trend which we can't look away from, but I think a lot of the kind of political energy has been focused on Netanyahu, and it's even been kind of a slogan, kind of a derogatory thing to say about left-wing voters, Rak lo Bibi, just not Bibi. That's all what you care about is just taking him down, and it's nothing to do with ideology and politics and so on. And in a way, I mean, I think it's more nuanced, but I kind of agree with that. And I think that, especially if we're trying to fight something so structural and so deep that has been going on for more than 50 years, then Netanyahu, is not the only thing standing in our way. And let us not forget, Benny Gantz's role in the Israeli military in the past year. So that happened, and basically we're still there's still some time to make changes, but we're basically looking at probably another Netanyahu government. And what's fascinating is that you might think that and maybe that's part of what I was thinking as well, is that world leaders are thinking only about Corona, they're thinking only about health, but actually from what we hear, from within partners and political leaders, the Trump administration and the Israeli government are going strong with the Trump plan. They haven't backed down. They've been they're still looking for support from other states for this basically annexation plan of the West Bank. So while we're deeply concerned about what's going on here and in the territories, those bigger that bigger political game is not really going anywhere. It's a very confusing moment because we have to kind of juggle our own personal safety, the safety of the people around us, thinking about global health issues, and also knowing that in a few months' time, or maybe even a year, that this will be over. The occupation is not going to be gone. It's not, and on the contrary. So the photo that is up here on the screen is of protesters who are just last week carried out a series of protests outside the Knesset when basically a few things happened that were dramatically threatening Israeli democracy. One is that the Likud wouldn't back down from having their chairman, the chairman Yudi Edelstein of the Likud was basically going to disperse the Knesset and the various committees on the basis of this crisis moment. So using emergency state laws to basically disperse the very function of the government, especially in a crisis time like this. It's extremely dangerous. And the other thing that was happening is that the government basically gave the green light to the Secret Service to track or to follow citizens who are suspected of breaking isolation, and it wasn't exactly sure if it was just people who were breaking isolation or maybe all citizens and so on. So there was two major issues here. One was really trying to prevent the forming of an alternative government and the functioning of the government process, and the other thing was the question of civil liberties and personal freedom. And still, those two things are kind of up in the air. They're not. There's no final kind of note on that. The Supreme Court interfered, and then there was another statement from Likud members saying, "Well, you know what? We're just not going to respect the Supreme Court's ruling," and that too caused a lot of, I would say, outrage, but not enough. Another thing that we heard just today was that maybe we're again in the kind of within the Corona regulations, that we might be in a situation where protests are also somewhat restricted. So we're in a very terrifying moment, and I think that one of our biggest takeaways over the years, especially maybe this will be the last note, and then we can open it up. One of our biggest takeaways from these kinds of trends, and we had I would say maybe the privilege of understanding this early on, about four years ago, when there was a major government onslaught on Breaking the Silence and other civil society organizations like B'Tselem, the New Israel Fund, Peace Now, Yesh Din, really a wide array of civil society organizations that were under heavy attack from the government and right-wing NGOs and spies and all kinds of wild initiatives. We were accused of treason. There were a number of court cases trying to delegitimize our work and criminalize our work. So in a way, we kind of had the privilege of understanding this a few years ago, and I think it's been it's helpful to understand what's happening in Israel proper in this context, because for the years that we were in the military, and from the thousands of testimonies that we've collected at Breaking the Silence, we've understood a few things about how occupation works. And for those of you who have maybe knowledge and experience of other occupations from other parts of the world and in history, a totalitarian regime, a regime that is stripping people's from their basic rights, and it is constantly wanting to expand, definitely in the West Bank, is not going to stop, precisely at the green line. And some would argue that, there was only one single year of true Israeli democracy between the military regime over Palestinian citizens of Israel until '66, and only in '67 then once again conquering of the West Bank and Gaza. So we've had this kind of this outlook for the past few years now, and I think it's helping us understand also how this crisis specifically is being managed by the right wing. We saw, I'm sure you have seen, I mean, the US is one major example of that, but more specifically Orban in Europe and other, and Bolsonaro and other very dangerous leaders that are making similar statements, trying to use this crisis to really crack down on the democratic structure and personal freedoms. So there is that global context, but there also is the occupation that is kind of the shadow of Israeli society for so many years. It's the shadow that we carried around with us, during and after our military service, but it's also a collective one. Those anti-democratic trends are really thriving in the past few years under Netanyahu's governments. Whether, I'll just give you maybe some examples of similar things that have been happening. For example, the Chok HaAsdara, I think it's called the kind of regulation law or something, which was a law that was passed, a bill that was passed in the Knesset about 2 years ago, and then was contested in the High Court, but basically attempts to, from within, to retroactively legalize land theft in the West Bank, and to retroactively make kosher outposts or settlements that were built on private Palestinian property. And it was, I mean, the essence of the law, of course, is extremely anti-democratic, but also it was the first time that the Israeli government really legislated de facto with regard to the occupied territory, something that basically makes the way for, or hints at, annexation. I had another example actually from just quite recently. The other thing is that many of you have been with us in Hebron, and you probably won't be surprised to hear that the Hebron settlers have not stopped, even though the virus is running freely also in West Bank settlements, and there has been new construction and new outposts being built as we speak in Hebron and other parts of the West Bank, of course with the support of the army, the government. There's a ton going on in East Jerusalem. I can maybe just kind of give a few examples of what's going on in recent days. In East Jerusalem, we've seen still very heavy police raids and arrests. But just last night, something that really was very, very disturbing, or 2 nights ago, was that there was a charity fund that had brought a truck of food to poor families in the neighborhood of Sol Bahel in East Jerusalem. And even though their operation there was completely legal, the police decided to confiscate all of this food that was going to be given to poor families who are isolated because of the virus. And so there's a viral video going around of the cops just unloading the truck and taking it and confiscating the goods, which was obviously heartbreaking. And Sol Bahel is one of the neighborhoods that was experienced many, many demolitions a few months, about half a year ago. And the other thing was that not far from where I live here in Jaffa, last night, there was extreme police violence, police brutality against a young Palestinian boy, 16-year-old Arab from here, Jaffa, who refused to identify to a cop and was probably, disrespectful and talked back, and then very quickly it became violent, and many people came out of the homes to see what was going on and to protest this police brutality. And it basically turned into a war zone. The images from there are extremely frightening. So this just happened last night. There were helicopters in the air. There were kids were later burning tires, and there were stun grenades being thrown by the police. And this is all inside Israel proper, Israeli citizens. But of course, these are not just any regular citizens. These are poor communities in Jaffa, Palestinian Arab communities that have experienced a lot of police brutality over the years. And so once again, this crisis is really pushing on a lot of different spots and bringing different friction points to kind of the boil. And this is once again just a reminder for us about, how we cannot separate, not only health-wise the movement of people and how we're, interconnected, but also in terms of society's norms. We can't expect that these anti-democratic norms of a military regime will be contained in the West Bank and Gaza, and that we will be safe from tyranny here inside Israel. So that has been, our biggest takeaway. And in terms of kind of thinking forward, we're really just very unsure at this point, and we're trying to do a lot of thinking with other Israeli human rights organizations and other civil society organizations about the situation in the occupied territories and in Israel specifically. I don't know how long I was talking for, but I think I'll finish here, and I'd be really happy to hear thoughts and questions, and I'll do my best to answer, even though once again, the situation is very strange for all of us. So please.
Good. Merphie, thank you so much for such a detailed, comprehensive overview of so many facets of what's going on the ground. So let's open the questions. Let me ask an opening, and then if folks have questions, maybe just type them in the sidebar, and that would be easier than opening up and everyone asking at once. So let me start by asking, so much has happened politically, and thanks for such a nuanced overview. It's in the past decade, it seems like a key part of the sort of rightward move of the Netanyahu administration has been this attack on the courts. And I'm curious, where do you see this maneuver that happened with Likud refusing to follow the high court's order to have a vote on a new Knesset speaker? Where do you see that in a sort of broader attack on the courts? Yeah, I'm curious what you think of that.
Yeah, so I'll just clarify that it was a statement of Amir Ohana, who previously in the previous government was the justice minister, and his statement was basically somewhere along the lines of I don't want to use any bad slang, but it was basically like you can say what you want and we'll do what we want. But eventually the court did rule in favor, you could say, of not even democracy, just of, the Knesset continuing to do its work. So they did order the Knesset to kind of bring the committees together. And I think there was a little bit of criticism from within the right, as well. It's not that everyone who votes right wing, believes in the destruction of democracy. Obviously, that would be a very, very broad streak. But unfortunately, within the Likud, there has been so much corruption and so much attack on the justice system. Yeah, so I'll just say that it's something that's happening for quite a few years. I mean, it's a slow process. The former Justice Minister, Ayelet Shaked, in terms of the occupied territories, I'll maybe just say, led a few very, very formative kind of moves. One of them was that Ayelet Shaked changed the kind of regulations or the law in such a way so that Palestinians who are not citizens of Israel can no longer appeal directly to the High Court. and have to first appeal to lower lower courts in the hierarchy, which was Palestinians who are not citizens was one of their major ways to protest illegal practices in the West Bank, mostly that have to do with killings and with land grabs and so on. So that was one major thing. And then within that kind of lower, magistrate court, Ayelet Shaked pushed for nominating more conservative and more right-wing judges. One of the Supreme Court judges today is a right-wing settler who lives in the Gush Etzion area. So we're seeing a little bit of a shift in that in terms of who's making up the Supreme Court. And I mean, years back already, we had one member of the Jewish Home Party saying that Bagatz, the High Court, needs to be run over with a bulldozer, essentially with a D9. There's a whole lot of push from the right wing today saying, that it doesn't have to do with democracy, yes or no. It's a matter of I'm not sure if I know these terms in English so well. It's a matter of the separation of the institutions, and that this overall kind of notion that the Supreme Court is interfering more than it should. So there's calls for the Supreme Court to not be able to be sort of above the Knesset, so kind of trying to lower its capacity in terms of stopping, anti-democratic bills and so on. So it's definitely something that's been going on for quite a while. And unfortunately, when it came to breaking the silence, but also other left-wing politics issues, we saw that the state attorney was basically going along for this political game as well.
So let's go to the chat questions. Peter asks, can you guys still run tours to Hebron? And let me maybe just add to that, because I saw Benzi wrote in that you can't. What are you guys, how do you transition your educational work and activism? I know I always love when I hear the sentence from Breaking the Silence that you are the organization that meets with the most number of Israelis in the human rights camp. So what's the status of programs on the ground, and how are you guys transitioning to continue this work in these times?
So in terms of tours, we've basically stopped everything, right? So we can't, meet groups. We're basically each in our homes at this point. But we stopped a few weeks ago, understanding, where this is going. And it's very difficult because, some of we're trying to put together some of these kind of webinars also with educational programs. So there are pre-military academies that we do a lot of work with. And they're all, some of them are still within the programs. Most of them have gone home. So we're trying to put together some of those types of activities. But it's indeed a very challenging moment for us. Fortunately, I guess, we won't be probably, maybe there will be some sort of adjustment maybe to Zoom interviews, but a big part of our work is speaking to soldiers, interviewing them when they share their testimony. So that is currently on hold, but there's always a lot of work to do. So testimonies is a very thorough process, cross-checking and verifying the testimonies that have been given, editing them so that they're somewhat comprehensible, translation and that kind of work. So fortunately, there is a lot of the kind of backbone of our work is still available to us, but meeting Israelis internationals is basically on hold. And yeah, just to touch on what Sam said, we meet about 10,000 people annually in tours, lectures, conferences. So we can just hope that things will be back to normal, because for Palestinians, the occupation will be here to stay, as I said, also after this is gone. So.
Good. The other folks have questions? I'll keep asking if not. I see that Jane asks here, we know you can't answer with any certainty, but our service learning trip to Palestine and Israel this year is June 10th to 11th. What's your sense, Merphie, of whether Jen and Max should dare to hope that the program might happen?
I really don't know. It has, to do with so many factors, whether there will be international flights, which is, something that's going on all around the world. Maybe internationals won't be let in at all, maybe only just Israeli citizens. The West Bank might be in a much worse situation, so I don't know if we'll be able to go there. And that's also, all of that is, who knows if Israelis in Israel proper will be back to normal. There's also a lot of economic consequences to all of this. So unfortunately, I mean, it's more than a 50-50. I think I would say it's like more 60-70% that it more likely that it will not take place. That's my guess.
And Barbara, do you want to unmute and ask the question that you just wrote in?
Unmute. Okay. Hi. Sorry, I forgot to identify myself. I'm asking what's the most effective way that we can ask progressive Jewish groups to respond to the health crisis, the larger political crisis, and to encourage an end to the occupation? How can we more effectively share our advocacy voice? Because right now I'm spending most of my days with different advocacy groups on behalf of Jewish and Palestinian citizens of both Israel and the West Bank. I just wanted to comment on the fact that you mentioned something that was a dilemma I hadn't considered, and that is, on the one hand, we want to end the occupation. If we were to end it tomorrow, what would be the infrastructure and the facilities and the healthcare and food and whatever that would be available to the West Bank and Gaza? It's kind of a dilemma because you would hope that this would be negotiated and done in a reasonable, sensible way. Anyway, how can we raise our voices together? Because I'm finding lots of splinter voices, and that's something that I'm part of an initiative that hopes to correct that.
I think there's a few good things that you can do. I mean, Breaking the Silence has our specific focus and kind of niche, and we're also trying to figure out exactly what we can do in the next few weeks to be, to be useful and to be helpful to this crisis. But there's two other extremely important organizations that I suggest following. One is Physicians for Human Rights, and the other one is Gisha. Physicians for Human Rights have been doing extremely important work in terms of information in the past few days and weeks. They do humanitarian work in the West Bank and in Gaza. And Gisha is an organization that deals specifically with Gaza and the issue of movement, but they too have been publishing information about what's going on there. And the other thing is that I'm happy to, I'm gonna send a link, maybe there's an English page, I'm not sure, this page is in Hebrew, but I'm gonna send a link to a fundraiser here in the chat, a fundraiser that some of our friends put together that is going directly to humanitarian aid in Gaza. Even though the numbers there are quite low, thank God, we're realistic and we know that it's probably not gonna be the case in a few days and weeks. And because Gaza is kind of in the shadow of, even more so than the West Bank, I think that's one very practical step that we can, those of us who are more privileged can take, just donating a little bit of money. And I think more broadly, I think this is the time, for us, for some of the other Jewish and anti-occupation groups to be putting some time together to think, what it is that we can do at this moment. But I think right now there's two issues for us. If I break it down, there's the issue of of the constitutional structure of democracy in Israel. That is.
You got. I missed what you said. You had a break.
So basically, just two things are on our minds and are the focus for us these days. One is what's going to happen with the Knesset and if there will be a government or if there won't. But even if there will be a Netanyahu's government, what kind of policies are they going to practice? because they don't seem internationally, they don't seem like they're stopping any of the, advancing Trump's plan, even in these days. And the other thing I think is practically speaking, understanding that all groups within Israeli society, including Palestinians in the territories, are interconnected in this moment. What's going on in the Haredi and the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel is also just devastating and heartbreaking. The estimate is that basically half of the city of Bnei Brak, one of the largest ultra-Orthodox communities, is all infected. The health minister himself, who's ultra-Orthodox, is in quarantine now.
Netanyahu.
Yes, as well. Netanyahu was the health minister is actually has the virus himself, and Netanyahu is only suspected to have been in the vicinity of someone else. But I think that is one of our biggest takeaways in this moment. Is even though we were breaking the silence, is once again is an organization that deals with something very specific, with soldiers coming forth and sharing our own experiences from the occupied territories. But now we're dealing with something that really connects Jaffa and Bnei Brak and East Jerusalem and Bethlehem and the Israeli settlements, whether we like it or not. Efrat is one of the biggest, statistically one of the biggest outbreaks as well in terms of population. So practical steps is a bit tricky for me at this point. But I'm happy to send resources to Sam and to all of you. I'm sure if you follow Physicians for Human Rights and Gisha, you'll be able to also get a better understanding.
I'll just mention that the New Israel Fund is having a Physicians for Human Rights Zoom call. I think it's on Monday. I'd have to go to my calendar and see, but New Israel Fund is having one.
Barbara, if you send that to me, then I can distribute it to this group.
That's really good. Just one thing that occurs to me is that there's so much wonderful information, wonderful, sad, terrible information. Because I was on the Gavat Haviva call yesterday and before that on this new group, J-Link, that you'll hear more about in the future. But I'm wondering whether we need some kind of summary newsletter, bullet points of information that captures some of the key issues, because of course Gavat Haviva is very worried about the impact of the health crisis in the Palestinian communities in Israel. I'm thinking out of the box. I will always do that. What might be something that we could share around with all of the wonderful people who are joining and obviously care a lot, joining these Zoom calls. Anyway, that's enough for me.
The one really good newsletter that I follow is the Foundation for Middle East Peace, that sends out a daily summary of news articles from the Israeli and Palestinian media covering key issues. I can also send a link to everyone in this call as a follow-up. I think Malcolm had a question as well.
Yeah, Malcolm, if you don't mind saying it in your own words, just so I'm sure that I understood your question.
Yeah, I'm saying, how is it dealt with now regarding protesting? Because you said it's pretty limited, the protests, and the virtual message to anything to do with saying we disagree with what the Knesset is doing, we disagree with that. How is that technically going now? Or is it frozen in a way? I don't know. With you guys, I mean, from.
Yeah, so again, I mean, we're Breaking the Silence as an organization wasn't participating in such a protest, and we don't usually do. Obviously, as individuals, we're politically active as well. The protest at the Knesset was basically a kind of drive-through protest of many people who drove in their cars towards Jerusalem. And actually, en route Jerusalem, the police tried to stop many of the vehicles with no reason, just simply telling them that they can't protest. but eventually they did manage to get through after the police was told that they have no mandate to restrict protests. And then there was the question, you know, depending how much benefit of the doubt you give the police, the question of health, you know, should people be allowed to protest? And the decision was that, you know, that has to be maintained no matter what as a basic democratic right. But today I saw that there are new regulations. So in terms of distancing, you can protest, but it can only be different groups of 10 who are each, you know, standing with distance from one another, 2 meters and so on. There was another, I think it's kind of ridiculous, but a cute, I guess, homemade protest. People who went out, I guess it was last week. Days and nights are kind of mixed. At 5 o'clock, it was just after, was it Gantz's decision to join Netanyahu? I can't even remember. So to all go out of, you know, to our balconies and windows and kind of make angry noise in protest. So that was one thing. And there's a lot of, you know, online digital organizing and stuff going on. And I think the health issue is challenging to all of this because people can't show up physically and protest in the same way that they did.
Jordan, you have do you want to ask your question, Jordan?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks so much. I wanted to ask if you could potentially speak a little bit more to how the, you know, disparities that have been longstanding between the Israeli and Palestinian health systems on either side of the Green Line are, you know, contributing on the ground to gaps in terms of who's has access to testing and who has access to different medical equipment right now. I've been reading, you know, a little bit where I can about that, but I was wondering if you'd be able to speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I mean, within Israel proper, there are many issues within, you know, within the health system. I mean, fundamentally, I believe we're in a pretty good situation in terms of other Western countries. There's pretty good healthcare here overall. It's nothing like what's going on in the United States, which sounds just despicable. But in terms of infrastructure, still there are many hospitals lacking, and there are not enough ER beds and breathing machines, respiratories, and stuff like that. So that is an issue for Israel proper as well. One of the issues that the Joint List has been pushing in the past few days is getting the government to do more testing in major Arab cities and towns inside Israel, because that hasn't really been happening in big numbers. I just saw today a new kind of drive-in station was set up in Rahat, a big Bedouin city next to Beersheba. So that's good news. There's, in terms of the occupied territories, Palestinians can get medical care inside Israel only if there isn't the sufficient care in Gaza or in the West Bank. Usually the default is to first send Palestinians to hospitals in East Jerusalem that get funding or somewhat supported. I'm not exactly sure about the bureaucracy, but by the PA, so they're not in kind of Israeli responsibility. And then cancer patients, their only way to be treated is inside Israeli hospitals. So the situation West Bank and Gaza is quite different. So Gaza has been under the blockade for about 12 years. If beforehand the default was that, sorry if you hear the noise from outside, the default was that I mean, many years back, before the permit system was issued, but you know, people could travel freely unless they were on some blacklists, unless they were you know, wanted in some way. The reasons for why they were on various blacklists is a whole other issue, but that was, let's say, the default. And then gradually over the years, the more that the permit system kind of sophisticated, the default is now that basically if you don't have a good reason, you can't enter Israel. And in Gaza, it's much more extreme. So from the West Bank, you know, people can in terms of medical cases as well, and I really do encourage those of you who are interested in this more to read Gisha reports about this issue of treatment inside Israel, because there have been specifically cancer patients that have not always gotten their permits in time for their treatments. There's basically a pressure, I don't know what the word is, but the permits are used as a means to pressure the population to kind of call out or to become collaborators and so on. So if you have a family member, it could be a brother, an uncle even, that is somehow affiliated with Hamas, your chances to get a permit, even for medical care, are very, very low. And what we see is that oftentimes the human rights work is very effective, because sometimes all people need is just one appeal to the High Court against, for one specific humanitarian case, and then suddenly there are no security concerns, and suddenly the Secret Service basically says, yes, this person is now suddenly not a threat to state security after 2 months that they were waiting. And so it's a reminder that legal and humanitarian work is extremely important, because it does bring results. But specifically around the corona issue, I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard that the Israeli government is planning on bringing corona patients into Israel. Basically, the policy has been closing the borders on either side. And we have to remember that when Israel says closing the borders, they mean closing off Palestinians, because Israeli settlers, of course, will continue to be treated inside Israel proper and will be able to move freely if they need. Sam, I can't hear you now. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay. I was just saying, thanks for such a comprehensive answer. The systems are so complex, and each system has its own details and logic. Thanks for breaking all of this down in such a nuanced way. Are there other folks who want to ask a last question or two?
I'm just going to quickly turn on the light here.
Great. And if not, Ben's, Deborah, do you want to ask what you put in here?
So I just got, someone just sent me this translation of a talk, this speech Netanyahu gave, I think maybe last night, saying that they're going to give stipends to all Israelis, and 500 per child, up to 4 children, things like that, and that everyone is going to be required to wear a mask. And I'm just wondering if you think that that's how that's going to affect both the Palestinians in Israel proper that are citizens and in the West Bank and Gaza.
I don't know how that's going to go about, if it's the stipend is supposed to cover purchasing masks, or if there's going to be distribution. But one thing that I did read today was that Israel is going to buy masks from a factory in Gaza, actually, which is, makes this whole situation so much more ironic. So hopefully in Gaza there will be masks, also for internal use. In the West Bank, at least the photos that I'm seeing, people are, at least the authorities are kind of ahead of us in that sense, in terms of self-protection. So I do hope that, it's hard to say. I mean, what happened here just yesterday in Jaffa was a startling reminder that, when the government wants, or when the authorities want, they treat Palestinian neighborhoods, even inside Israel proper, as, I mean, it was a war zone. It looked like a refugee camp in the West Bank. I really couldn't believe the photos and the videos. Stun grenades, on a main street in Jaffa. One thing that I maybe just wanted to pop up, actually, I'll do the share screen thing once again, is that there was this this briefing this morning. One of the things that's probably going to happen is that, and already, is that soldiers, a few units of soldiers of combat and kind of home security soldiers are going to be, I guess, used or for this, for dealing with the closure and enforcing, people staying in their homes. So this morning, this is a journalist who published this briefing that soldiers were given in South Tel Aviv. Of course, the first place that armed authorities go to is South Tel Aviv, Jaffa, and the poor neighborhoods where there are refugees and and other low-income societies. So in the briefing, I translated it roughly. Basically, they were told. The briefing was as follows. Basically, don't think to interfere with an arrest. You're supposed to basically just be safeguarding the policemen who are doing the legal work. I'm reminding you all, we're not in the territories and we're not on the border. Until a cop shoots a bullet, it takes a very long time. We're not in the army. A cop shoots a bullet only at the very, very last resort after he was shot at, and something about the press. But I think it was just, it was a very telling moment. We're not in the territories. You can't do whatever you want. We're not in that wild west of the West Bank in which, some of the soldiers that are being deployed now inside Israel are used to, not seeing Palestinians as citizens with rights, with dignity. I really think it's so telling, and including, when it comes to open fire regulations, the fact that they're being told that until a cop shoots a bullet, it takes a very, very long time. We're not in the army. Now, that may be okay or may be justified when we're talking about war, but a big part of what soldiers are doing throughout their military service is controlling a civilian population in the West Bank, and it's somewhat in Gaza. So I think that was just a telling moment, and I can only hope that soldiers and police will be sensitive and will be, doing their duty from a civil duty towards Israeli citizens and not only citizens, refugees and other undocumented workers. But it's a reminder to us that things are not exactly the same, not far from us in the West Bank, where even under the coronavirus, soldiers are still arresting, doing checkpoints, patrolling, using violence in various means. So if there are any more questions, I'm happy. And Bensi, also, if you want to chime in, I've been talking quite a bit.
I'll just maybe add on to the last point. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
That with the report about from Bar Peleg about this police officer briefing these soldiers. They're going on patrol now, but you can't do whatever you want. This isn't the territories. I think one of the things that I think is so striking, and that perhaps we'll be able to leverage as an organization, trying to kind of public and in general to the world, is talking about what it's like to live under a military rule, which people in a sense are getting a little taste of, a small taste of. I mean, on the roads here, you have, police are stopping cars and asking people where they're going, where they're going, are starting to see this and realize, wow, this is really absurd. Here we are, you have random checkpoints on roads, and you had one of the pictures that Merphie showed earlier with the black flags. One of the issues in the past week and a half really was this emergency authorization to start tracking and recording basically Israelis' phone calls. Israeli there was a call to arms, even center, you know, maybe even center right politicians were, and you know, all these things are just like part of the routine in the West Bank. You know, these checkpoints, these random soldiers are stopping randomly Palestinian, and what's at risk is not just a, you know, a 500 shekel fine. It's you know, it could be, you know, being, you know, taken away for hours, or you know, like you know, it appears countless times in our testimony, the kind of just the constant presence of military, the constant kind of threat of that I think civilian populations in Israel are starting to feel somewhat. Obviously, the justification and talked about is completely different, but I think that may be something that we'll be able to leverage, trying to get our message across going forward.
Could I just say that your comments were broken up, like very broken up, but I think we got the gist of it. I just want to apologize for the spelling errors in my comment on the side, because I heard that you were going to close off Spike, not Pike. I just wanted quickly to respond to Jordan. One of the things that I was writing in response to his question, I just want to say that one of the wonderful things about Israel is that the Palestinian community contribute between 30 and 40% of the healthcare professionals. If you look at the doctors, the nurses, and the pharmacists, you've got well beyond the population. You know, if it's 20% of the population, it's almost double that in the healthcare system. There's a real dilemma that I see coming because the Palestinian communities have had fewer tests, have fewer resources, and the concern is that as the numbers spike in the Jewish community, there'll be fewer beds available. Gevada Viva is preparing its dorms in case they need an overflow of beds, and we talked about delivering supplies within the communities. They seem to be forming some really good local organizations about supplying food and resources to people that are needing to stay home. I just wanted to make that comment. But what if the Palestinian community got sufficiently concerned about the absence of equal care and decided to walk out? Just thought I'd raise that as a potential dilemma. What if they decided that they needed to address the needs within their own community? I'm not seeing it happening. I'm just worried about the feeling of betrayal within the Palestinian community with the confluence of the virus and the Benny Gantz's decision. Anyway, that's enough.
Yeah, I'll try to address quickly what Malcolm raised, which is what's going on in East Jerusalem. So I've been, you know, following just a little bit of what Nir Hassan has been publishing. He's the Haaretz correspondent for Jerusalem and specifically East Jerusalem. And so one kind of more formal decision that I think is intact, Malcolm, maybe you actually know more than me, is that the neighborhoods beyond the separation fence were basically locked up, essentially, so that the borders into West Jerusalem were closed off for the neighborhoods that are beyond the separation barrier. For those of you who are not immersed in the details, there are Palestinian neighborhoods that are within the vicinity of the municipal boundaries of Jerusalem, but Israel built the separation barrier in such a way that they are physically separate from the rest of the city and have to cross through checkpoints on a daily basis to enter the city. So from what I've understood, some of the neighborhoods on the other side of the barrier have been locked out. So who knows what will happen there in terms of the spread of the pandemic. And furthermore, I'm not so familiar with what you're raising here, that in overall or in general, some people can't access West Jerusalem hospitals. I'm not sure if you're referring to something legal or just physical barriers that I'm sure there are many in Jerusalem. So yeah, I don't know that there has been also any major, actually, you know what I did see today, just today, I'm now remembering a new testing, like a drive-in testing station in, I believe, maybe Tzul Bahel. I just saw that online, but I believe that at this point, maybe I'm naive, but I think that the testing issue is kind of, it's an overall crisis. So there's not enough testing in Israel in general. And only people who have, you know, severe or not severe, but, you know, have very clear symptoms are called up to get tested. So what we're seeing in Bnei Brak is going to be a real tragic situation. Thank God, I think most of the south of Israel hasn't been too infected. We're looking at a few centers, Jerusalem, Bnei Brak, and hopefully Tel Aviv is up next, the center of Israel, but much, much lower in the numbers. So I hope that there is significant testing in East Jerusalem soon.
Great. Okay. This has been so comprehensive and detailed, and Merphie and Benzi, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to share with us so much of what's happening health-wise, politically, and as always, we'll look forward to being in touch and seeing how things develop, and hopefully we'll all look forward to being able to go back on a Breaking the Silence tour sooner rather than later, and hopefully we'll have up and running pretty quickly some extend days on Breaking the Silence.